Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series, where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild adventure, The Heir of Orcus Verse 1, designed by Anthony Joyce for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, please consider supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to Platinum patrons Andrew, Brian, Richard, and Joe, and Gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, and Pretty Boy and Yuma. Thank you all so much for your support. I have a lot of fun nostalgia for video games. 8-bit was my early childhood, transitioning to 16-bit, and so on, eventually turning into writing games for a livelihood now. I have not seen a DM's Guild module that uses literally a pixelated video game style art. And my initial reaction when I saw this was to roll my eyes. I was like, okay, this is silly and goofy. And especially nowadays in the era, in this golden age of indie games, like we've seen so much of this. The people that grew up with these games like me are now making the games, and you're just seeing so much of this exhausted, and everybody's pulling from this well. What is the big deal here? Well, it's done really, really well here. I will say that. I enjoyed. I mean, look at the cover of this. Like, it's really fun looking. It's something I haven't seen before, and I really respect that the designer really went kind of full on into it in terms of giving us pixelated tokens for virtual tabletops, which is great. A pixelated isometric maps to play on, and even pixelated portraits of headshots of all the major NPCs, as if I was playing like an old King's Quest, Quest for Glory, or LucasArts, any of those just old pixelated games that I grew up with. And that's a lot of fun, so I really do like the way that's done quite a bit. That's the first thing you're going to see, so that's what I'm opening with, but I do like that. This is it says 2-hour adventure for Tier 1 characters. That is way, 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 way underestimating the amount of time it takes to play D&D in general. I think 2 hours is if your players sprint through this and don't fight at all, which that is a cool thing about this adventure, is your players can actually get through this entire adventure without any combat, which is really nice. But, I mean, any combat situation can take an hour by itself easily, so be prepared that this one could be designed as a one-shot, but it's going to vary quite a bit depending on what your players do. It is designed for a party of 3rd level. It says Tier 1, so it does have scaling for pretty much anywhere from 1 to maybe even up into early Tier 2, but solidly Tier 1, which should be levels 1 through 5. And it is part 1 of 2, so it's the Heir of Orcus Verse 1. And there is also the Heir of Orcus Verse 2. And this is very important to note because this one doesn't really end so much as it just kind of stops almost abruptly. And then you pretty much have to play Verse 2 to continue the story, which I think is a major bummer, because if you're going to release your modules in an episodic format, which is fine, you still need to have a beginning, middle, and end for each of those episodes. Otherwise, it really just feels incomplete, as this one does. And I was sent the second one as well as this one together as review, but they are being sold separately on the DM's Guild, so I wanted to review them separately. And I have not even looked at Verse 2 yet at the time of this review, because I really wanted to just review this adventure on its own. And I really like it. I mean, I'll obviously go into my review in detail in a moment. I think it's really well done. But the weakest links are the beginning and the end, and the reason the end is a weak link is because it just doesn't really end. It just kind of stops. I mean, even episodes in a TV series have a nice little flow to each episode for the most part, and this one it really feels like it just kind of it's like a book of a chapter. A chapter might stop and have like a cliffhanger, but it's not like you buy chapters in a book. It's the full, and this is kind of what it feels like. So that's kind of a knock against it, but I do like this module, so let's go into the Heir of Orcus. Unfortunately, we have to start with another negative, is that the actual adventure hook is very, very weak. So the theme here is the background of the Blood War, which is the D&D never-ending war between angels and demons, kind of a classic, Christian mythology, but it's seen in a lot of fantasy and other elements as well. Probably most famously in the Diablo series has that war going on quite nicely. In this case, the players are summoned to the ominously named Mephisto Manor, which is home to a pair of tiefling twins who have called upon the bravest adventurers to help them rescue a lost mythical figure, an angel of Tyr known as Sir Vindictus. Make sure I know how to pronounce that before I say it. And they're hosting a grand dinner to discuss the details with the adventurers. There's a nice background information here that tells you what's going on. The fact that twins are actually a succubus and an incubus in disguise, and they have recently attacked a group of Knights of Tyr called the Knights of Holy Judgment, and stolen a map that leads to the entrance of the Temple of Orcus. Now, the players throughout this adventure can choose to either side with the Knights of Holy Judgment, the good path, or the Cult of Zariel, which is the archdevil that the Mephisto twins worship/work for, which is obviously the evil path. There's technically a third path, which is you can just say fuck all and do whatever you want, and that's called the Chaos path. And this is very video gamey to me. This is very like that Mass Effect, that video game, which is like that stark black and white. You have a choice between, and that choice is kind of nice because it does flow throughout the adventure. That being said, I think that reading it as a DM, there are certain paths that I would definitely want my players to choose because I think they would just be more enjoyable. And oddly enough, the path is initially evil, and then kind of evil up until the actual dinner party, and then at the end, eventually, become good. So, like, the first half evil and the second half good is how I think the adventure works best, because I think there's some really good social encounters here, and that's something the adventure does exceedingly well. It's very role-playing and social heavy, with combat as, like, an option, which, I think combat is always an option because you can always brute force anything, but there is a very, very nice particular focus on role-playing, storytelling, and characters, and the characters are very, very well written. The bummer is the initial adventure hook just has the characters literally in this nice horse-drawn carriage driven by this deformed gnome who is actually one of the agents of Zariel also. And why are the players in that situation? Well, the adventure hook just says, come up with a reason. It's like, just use your characters' backstories and figure out why they're there, and so on. It feels very Adventure League-y in that it doesn't really offer a way to get you there. It's just kind of assumes everybody sits down like, okay, well, here's your situation. And just the DM just kind of tells you, like, you're there. So in terms of like a drop-in thing, it becomes a lot more difficult. And I would have just appreciated a bit more options or just some simple elements about, well, did the players get like, was there a note or something? Like, how did they get involved in this? What do they know? And all of that. So the initial adventure hook is very weird. It's just that here's the opening situation. They're in this carriage. They're already on the way to the manor. And then on the way, and by the way, there's this nice little visual of the, it's a very simple, basically one shot with the caveat that, who knows how long combat's actually going to take you, adventure. But the fact that he even spelled out, like, here's path 1, 2, and 3, and then within path 3, there are technically some side things you can do, but looking at this, it is fairly linear, but there's still that good and evil path that you can essentially choose. I'm just recording this after I ate lunch, so I've still got some phlegm in my throat. The initial scene, and it's very, very well organized, is the knights come up to the players. And it's here that the players already make a choice between siding with these knights, which is basically the Order of the Gauntlet, although here it's the Knights of Holy Judgment. The group led by Sir Titus, who's just typical stalwart, kind of firm-jawed hero, knight character. And they can either choose to just fight these guys, if they want to, take the evil path, or side with them and let them basically join them on their way to Mephisto Manor, which unfortunately kind of leads them to basically kicking down the door and just attacking these tieflings because the knights tell them that these tieflings attacked them and captured one of their own, stole the they're basically just bad guys. And that's a bummer because I think the module works better if the players show up and actually engage in the dinner party. So I'm almost hesitant to even use this opening scene with the knights because it predisposes the character. It tells the characters too much information and predisposes them because, again, I think most parties tend towards good. In fact, in Adventure League, I believe you can't even play like explicitly like super evil character because just parties will fall apart. It's a very fine line to walk for any party. And I think it works better if the players actually kind of play along with what's going on. So it's kind of a weird thing to have. I just think it works better if they actually don't, if they do side with the knights, then at least hopefully can back the knights off and still play along with the party. Maybe they can play both sides. I think the role playing aspect is so strong here and so good that I don't want these knights to basically force the characters to just kick down the door and fight them. And the knights, as written, are very much in that goal. They are these zealous, like Order of the Gauntlet, like good and evil stuff. So there's no reason they would even talk to these tieflings. So kind of a conflict between what the adventure gives and what I think would be the best way to actually play this module. But just judging at this screen, you can see how much information is given per NPC. You've got what does the characters know, what does like the gnome know, what does the Sir Titus know, and then the choices they can make. And I really love this part, which is playing the pillars. And there's a thing about in D&D there are three major pillars, which is combat, exploration, and social encounters. These are basically the three ways that you can solve a problem. It's like the old Fallout games. There was, you could either do things through fighting, just brute force, or you could do like sneaking or exploring or, climbing around or doing some kind of thing that involved you basically thinking outside the box. Or social, which is you just talk to somebody. So the classic tale of like if there's a guard, do you just fight the guard? Do you sneak around the guard? Or do you convince the guard to let you in somewhere? That's like the easiest way to break down what those choices are. And this adventure has those pillars for every single scene, which is really, really cool. So, for example, for this knight encounter, combat is obviously you fight the knights. The knights believe those who do not stand with them are against them. In their righteous zeal, they try to kill or subdue the characters. Or exploration. Characters can attempt to escape using the carriage or other mounts available to them. A chase should be theatrical and fun. Oh, God, it says that. The DM is empowered to run a chase as they see fit. So turn into a chase sequence, which is great. I wouldn't have, thought of that as an option. But like, oh, yeah, of course, they're in a carriage. These guys ride up to them. You could turn into a chase sequence. Or social, obviously, you can just talk to the knights and convince them one way or the other. And it's just a persuasion check. And usually they have the numbers in there. This one doesn't. But it's very nice for a DM to be able to see how players can handle each of these situations and give a good option of how can players handle these situations without it just devolving into combat, although combat should always be an option because that's, it's D&D. You can handle a situation how you want to. It has a lot of the quality of life stuff, which is the encounter adjustments. If your players have, are lower level or have less people or vice versa, you can add stronger, so you can, adjust it for different size parties as well as different levels. The Mephisto Manor is the majority of this module. The bulk of this verse 1 takes place in the Tieflings Manor. And you can see right here the art style is literally like isometric pixelated art. Like if you've played, basically any indie game, any indie video game in the last 5 to 10 years, you've played a game that looks like this, which is not a knock against. I love the style. I love these games. I would never have thought to use this for D&D specifically, and I'll show you in a moment. It actually ends up working pretty well. Every single area of this, essentially a dungeon, it's I think 7 or 8 areas, is given a full page of description and features, which is really, really impressive. Like every room has meaning. There's something, and that doesn't mean there's like a monster in every room or anything like that, but there's just something interesting in there. It might be like this is the gnome's bedroom, and you can find out the entire history of the gnome who sold his soul and had to fight in the Blood War. And like none of that is actually important information to use in this module, especially because the players can end up just killing that gnome at any point. But it's just kind of it's so much nice. It's a nice piece of information to have in there for DMs, and that the players can discover like more and just make a reason and rewarding for players to explore. And that reward doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh, you find gold or you find treasure. It could be just you find this interesting bit of lore or information that helps expand upon, the creatures or the area or the setting or whatever else. And I think this does that exceedingly well. Even the kitchen has got it's got a nice breakdown too of like lighting, smells, and sounds. So aromas of garlic, onions, and spiced meat. A boiling pot bubbles on the stove. That is awesome DM descriptive stuff. I would almost like it if they did the kind of cutout box that was literally like, here's what you read to the players specifically, because that's just very easy shorthand for me as a DM to just look at that and okay, I can read this information. That information is there if you look for it, and it's still well organized. I would have almost liked to see those boxes of like, okay, here's what you actually read to the players as the DM. I think that could have been helpful. And also it would have been nice to have, for those scenes where it's literally an NPC shows up and says a thing, it would be nice to have that thing that they say. That's a good way of me as a DM also getting to know how each player would talk. as well as having that initial conversation. Now, granted, when you have back and forth, then it's nice to just have those notes about, okay, here's how these NPCs react, what they know, and what the players can learn. But having that kind of initial in quote thing, and that's not like a big con or anything. That's just kind of suggestion stuff from me. When I like to see when I'm reading a DM's Guild module. And again, you can see the pillars in all these areas. If they fight the Mephisto twins, or they can sneak around the manor maybe and use the keys. Excuse me. The twins themselves have keys, as well as the gnome has keys to different things. There's a really neat part where a player can challenge the Incubus twin to a game of dragon chess and actually win his helm of comprehend languages, because he's got a really cool backstory. He had his lower jaw ripped off in the Blood War when he was on the front lines, and so he can't talk properly. So he uses this helm to have and in sign language, and then kind of can use telepathy to talk to people. Players can actually win that off of him if they play this game of dragon chess. Of course, involves a lot of skill checks and things, but that's really fun. I think the right players can get really into that, and that's another reason why I don't want the players to just kick down the door of this manor and just fight these twins. I really want them to play along, and kind of discover things. Maybe somebody sneaking around the house. Like, this module will work really, really well with the right players who run it, who play along and want to really treat this as like, okay, this is a social encounter, but also we can sneak around and do things without it just kind of devolving into a straight up combat sequence. So if your players are just kind of murder hobos, want to just fight shit and get loot, I don't think this module works well for that, because there's actually not that much combat or basically any dungeon crawling or anything to that one. It's very, very social heavy, but all the social stuff is really well done. And frankly, this manor looks like a lot of fun to just explore around and find. And eventually they will find a hidden shelf in the library. And look at this, all this information on just the different scrolls and books they find in the library, and each one is written in a different hand. So like Celestial, Infernal, Abyssal, so players have to have those languages to even read that shit. That's really, really good. I love that. I mean, just look at the information in this library. And there's nothing in this library. I mean, I'm just saying nothing. There's no monsters. There's no treasure. It's just lore. It's a lot of fun lore to discover. So hopefully your players are into that. That's going to be what you want for this adventure. Eventually they will find the hidden cellar behind the bookshelf, where they see one of the knights, as the Knights of Holy Judgment have claimed that one of their own was captured. They are correct. The twins did capture one of the knights. They plan on sacrificing her to Zariel, I guess, which there is an evil path the players can choose if they want to just join the, kill the knights, join the tiefling twins. It's essentially chooses like which NPCs do you want for the dungeon you're going to. Do you want to take the twins with you, or do you want to take the knights with you? Although it seems like you would have to kill one or the other in order to do that. And there is an interesting bit here at the end of leaving the manor. You can see the really fun portrait art here. I love this pixel art. It actually has really good notes on what happens if certain NPCs die, and what you can do, and even if the characters have sided with that faction, and if that faction dies. And for the most part, these, according to the module, a lot of these characters can come back as something else. So, for example, the Mephisto twins, they're born again in the infernal realm, so they can just come back and haunt the players again, which is fun. The actual knights could come back as a sword wraith warrior if they're against them, or come back as in order to join them, or come back as a revenant in order to kill them, depending on which faction they sided with. So that's really good notes, and kind of gives, it's a decently linear adventure, but there are choices and options to be made, which does feel like a good RPG video game. Because a video game, it can't just include anything and everything. Even Skyrim has limits to what the players can do and how the world can react to. Instead, it gives you a lot of options and specific branching paths to go on, and that's what this does. It has just the specific options and branching paths. So who do you kill? Who do you side with? What do you end up doing? All of that is included information, which is very, very nice to have. The unfortunate thing is, the module basically ends so that you leave the manor, you get the map, and you journey to this cave, and you get to the entrance, and then the module ends. What? You're just getting to the good stuff. You literally just got to the good part. I mean, not the good. I like the manor too, but it literally ends. Basically, at the end, there's this neat trap where if you pull the lever, this blade comes out and tries to decapitate you. That's always good. Almost randomly, there's a black dragon here. It just happens that the entrance is by a layer of the black dragon. This is what the map helps you do. Is it helps you bypass this dragon's lair and lets you come up to this the actual entrance up here instead of having to even deal with this dragon. So, and it's included as an optional encounter because even a young black dragon is exceedingly powerful foe for a party of third level PCs. That it actually is adjusted to where this black dragon has apparently gone insane from being this close to the Temple of Orcus, and the players can use skill checks to actually drive it into fits of laughter, which I think could be a fun role-playing tool to literally role-play an insane dragon who like cackles with laughter instead of taking an action, like it shuts him down. So that could be really interesting and a fun balancing tool. It's an optional encounter if the players have the map. If they don't have the map, then they do have to actually go through this dragon. But that's not really an ending still, because the dragon is just kind of there as almost a random event encounter. Although again, the players don't have to. It doesn't have to necessarily be a combat encounter. The players can use skill checks and can sneak past him and do all that, which is great. But we don't include the dungeon. It just ends. You can see. I got to this part and I was like all excited. I was like, oh, this is going well. And then I got to that. I was like, wait a minute. And I literally scrolled up, scrolled down, scrolled up, and I was like, it ends there. That's terrible. If you're gonna divide your adventure up into episodes, you still need to have a good beginning, middle, and end. And I don't think this constitutes a good ending. This is very much a cliffhanger that you would get like, in the chapter of a book, and then you want to turn the page and keep reading, and not, you don't buy the second half of the book. And it's being sold as separate adventures. So I really don't like the way it ends. I really feel like there should have been a better ending there. I didn't realize basically this entire adventure would basically just be that manor. I literally thought it was going to be, okay, Act 1 is getting to the manor, Act 2 is the manor, and then Act 3 is the Temple of Orcus. Well, it turns out Act 3 is just this cave entrance to the Temple of Orcus, which has that black dragon, optional encounter, and then there's another optional encounter if you want to have your players find the Lost Knights. I have to scroll down. All of these, by the way, all these maps you're seeing are separate maps that include gridded and non-gridded. There's a Fantasy Grounds module. The amount of content you get with this is actually really, really impressive. Some of the best I've seen. They actually had, the fact that it's very VTT friendly, I'll say that. So for Roll20 and for Fantasy Grounds, if you play on those, this one is very, very good. If you like obviously the very much old school RPG video game art style, because that is what this is. There it is. So here's the Fate of the Lost Knights. You get actually a random cave map, which is great, and it's just kind of a series of skill checks and various obstacles that the players can use to actually find them. So I was disappointed in the way it ended, because I was really, really enjoying myself reading this through and enjoying the art and everything. I don't think it's gonna knock. It wouldn't knock my review. I don't rate my reviews here. I do on the DMs Guild because they have rated reviews there. I don't think I would dock like a full star or anything for that. Well, I would say normally I would, but the amount of pros outweighs the cons so much. Like, there's so much I really do enjoy here. The fact that you can get through, all the encounters without combat. There's such a good focus on story and role-playing and characters, and all the characters are very richly detailed. All of that is really good stuff that helps, I think, elevate it above what basically not having a good ending would give it. And I think, and again, I have not looked at verse 2, but assuming verse 2 has the same quality, then the full story would be absolutely incredible and just a wonderful, not quite a one-shot, but still a really fun kind of tier 1 story. But I just wish this one had more of its own beginning, middle, and end if you're going to sell it separately on the DM's Guild. Otherwise, this really should have probably been just packaged together with part 2 and just sold, I guess, at a higher price or whatever to balance that out. But I just don't like where the division was given, I guess. And again, I have not looked at verse 2 at all to look at that. You can see you get these really nice player handouts. I was extremely impressed with the amount of art assets and content you get with the purchase here. In fact, Anthony actually set up, I can switch to this real quick. There we go. So this is what I used. This is what I used for my Roll20 reviews. Which this is, he gave this or invited me, whatever you want to call it, this Roll20 module, and I don't know. I don't think this is sold as a Roll20 module you can buy on the marketplace. I don't think. Somebody can correct me on that. I mean, I searched for it and I couldn't find it there. The buying the module gives it to you on Fantasy Grounds because you can get that .mod file. But Roll20 I don't think has anything like that. Instead, you just get all the artwork and handouts that you want. I think he just used this as an example of how to set this up in Roll20 to where you've got all the the tokens and portraits and things that you want. You can see how they, because I was skeptical, and I look at this and I go, okay, this looks really good. This looks really good on Roll20. Like it's very, very hard to do it's hard to do anything but a classic top-down graph paper map because that's it doesn't have elevation or anything on here. But I think this still works. And it's got I don't know. Okay, that's not built in there. But it's got dynamic lighting in there. If I do has sight, will that work? No, I think because the whole thing is dark. Let's switch that. Global illumination, please. Okay. There we go. So you can see the dynamic lighting here. This door will have to be fixed right there. But it's got, so, I mean, this is, and again, I don't think you can buy this module, but this is an example of, I mean, this is just a good map of the manor. But it just works really well, and I was surprised how well it worked, because again, I was ready to roll my eyes when it came to this silly, pixelated art style. Like, okay, well, this is very video gamey. Is this really going to work for RPG? And my takeaway is yes, emphatically yes. It works very well, to where I would maybe even run this with this art style. And before I would be like, okay, well, even if I like this adventure, there's no way in hell I'm using this art style. But now, actually looking at it and seeing how much care and detail went into it, even of the little pixelated tokens and the portraits, that all makes me really excited to the possibilities of, well, shit, I could just roll with a campaign that looks like an old ass, Ultima game or Dragon Quest or whatever games had that little. Ultima's probably a good example of that. It's the little pixelated, like non-animated tokens like moving around on that. That's a lot of fun, and it looks really, really good. So I was very impressed with that. I'm not going to go through this whole module again. This is a DM's Guild review, not a Roll20 review, but just note that it is a very, very VTT-friendly adventure, which is really impressive and not something that a lot of adventures do. So let's see. I want to switch back to the tabletop page. I've got all kinds of windows open, as you can imagine, to try and... Okay, there we go. We're back in here. Let's scroll to the top and go through my pros and cons for the Heir of Orcus Verse 1. Pros: the unique pixelated art style is well utilized and looks fantastic, from the isometric maps to the pixelated headshot portraits. I am a huge, huge fan. It made me a believer in that art style. Pro: maps are provided for all the areas in the module, including gridded and non-gridded, as well as nifty card handouts depicting the NPCs and pixelated tokens for virtual tabletops. Again, that's just my big pro, the fact that this is extremely virtual tabletop friendly, which makes sense given its video game inspirations and background. So I think that is a nice translation. Pro: the module is very well organized, including notes on what happens when certain NPCs are killed. I like the way it's broken down, the way it's got the flow chart here, the scenes, every area, encounter adjustments, the notes on the people. Like, everything is very easy to find. It's very easy to read. Pro: each scene has a concise method for tackling the problem in 3 different ways that highlight the major D&D pillars of combat, exploration, and social encounters. That's awesome. Don't think I've ever actually seen that specifically done in a DM's Guild module, which is to break down how can the players tackle each, problem via either combat or exploring or social engagement, which is fantastic. I really, really like that. I was impressed with how well it's organized, the fact that it's just on the bottom of the page and it's got just a little blurb of like a sentence or two, but it still gives me as a DM ideas to be like, okay, I can really see how players can think outside the box with all these encounters, which is great. And final pro: every single challenge can be successfully completed without combat, which that's not like, you don't win a reward for doing that or anything, but I just think that's a really, really neat thing and a good example of how to think outside the box with D&D. And that's not, it's just that it's very story heavy. I'll say that. There's not a lot of combat, to where I almost felt like there should have been at least one like random combat encounter somewhere in the manor, like some kind of maybe creature guarding the knight in the cellar, or maybe some kind of, animated armor that comes alive if the players sneak around too much, like maybe something else to make it a little more combat. And that's a very weird thing to have, as I'm usually never, it's always usually everybody's got a ton of combat, or, plenty of, it's never like light on combat, to where I almost wish there was more, and this one kind of has that. Cons: it really lacks a proper adventure hook, to where it just says, like, look, here's the situation your players are in, come up with a reason why they're there. It doesn't really offer any kind of way to get players into that horse carriage already heading towards the manor and be motivated to help them with their summons. So it's a tricky way to get players started on this adventure. And the other con is at the other end of the spectrum. On the end of it, the module doesn't really have a proper ending, and it really requires Verse 2 to continue and see it all the way. Like, I really want to see what happens to the Temple of Orcus now, and how these different paths can play out. So that's a bit of a bummer that you basically need Verse 2 to play this whole story. Final verdict: With lovely pixel art, well-written NPCs, and lots of satisfying avenues for role-playing and exploration, the Heir of Orcus Verse 1 is a great start to a memorable adventure. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. And you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.